Look at it, it's bigger than me. I am very excited to be up here. It's very exciting to be this tall. I don't ever get to see the world from this perspective. But I'm excited to be here because this is the future of America sitting right here in front of me. The future of America. That's how we need to look at ourselves today. I think sometimes we see what's happening in America. We see what's happening in Washington, D.C. We see what's happening in our state capitals and even in our hometowns, and we sometimes get overwhelmed by what we see. But we got to get out of this mindset about us and realize that it's a bigger thing. It's about the future of America. It's not about us. It's about our children, our grandchildren. It's about our posterity and our obligation to them. That's what our framers said. Life, fortune, sacred honor for ages and millions yet unborn. I think part of how and why we are overwhelmed is because we don't know what to do. I travel all over the country. I do about 265 events in over 22 states every single year. And the most asked question I get is, what can we do? What do we do to turn this around? Wouldn't you like to know what to do? Well, here's the thing. If we had been teaching the Constitution properly for the last 100 years, we'd know exactly what to do, because the solutions to fixing our problems are the exact same solutions that existed in 1789 when we ratified the Constitution. And we have to stop with this mentality of looking for a political messiah. There is no such thing as a political messiah. People are always asking me, who are you going to vote for President of the United States? I said, what difference does it make? Not any pun intended, of course. But you think about it. We need a revolution in America. We need a revolution of the mind. Nothing has to change. We don't need to change the Constitution. We don't need to change America. We don't need to make America something else. We need to change this. We need to change how we think about government. We have to change the way we look at government. We got to change the way we want government to do things. Because we are not a reflection of our government. The government is a reflection of its people. And we keep asking government to do things it's not supposed to do. And the only way this is going to be fixed is not through an election, not through the President of the United States, but through the people. The proper perspective of politics, people, and power. That's the only way this is going to be fixed. How many of you think the federal government is out of control? That's practically unanimous of wherever I go. And I'm not always preaching to groups that are considered conservative. I teach to groups that are even fringe-like liberal. And everybody thinks that the federal government is out of control. Now, they have different reasons why it's out of control, but everybody thinks it is. But everybody is looking for the way to fix it, when the way already exists. But we've been somehow duped into believing that the Constitution is arbitrary, that it's a living, breathing document. And therefore it offers us no hope, no structure, and no stability. And nothing could be further from the truth. The Constitution is built of time-tested, blood-bought principles. Axiomatic principles that have proven themselves to be true for over a millennia. And we need to pick up our principles and make them our policies. Right now, America is ruled by fear and a desire for prosperity. That's how Washington, D.C. works these days. All policies are ruled by fear and the desire for prosperity. But those things are phantoms. You will never feel safe. You can have an arsenal in your home and you will still never feel safe. Somebody asked Mr. Rockefeller, would you tell us, Mr. Rockefeller, when enough money is enough? He said, I don't know, I'll tell you when I get there. Because prosperity is a phantom. You will never have enough. We need to pick up the proper measuring stick. We need to pick up the right standards, the standards that created our constitutional republic, and stop relying on politicians, politics, and false policies. Here's the problem. Americans have lost sight of the standard. Can I ask you a question? I don't want anybody to answer out loud. I just want you to come up with the answers in your own mind for just a few minutes. The First Amendment. We all like to say that the Second Amendment protects the rest, but that's not entirely true. The First Amendment is first on purpose, because think about this. If you do not have the power to communicate, then it's just you on your front porch with your Mossberg, all alone. But with the power to communicate, you can call forth the militia, you can call forth your neighbors. Not only that, you can expose what the government is doing in violation of our rights, and others will come. See, that was the difference between Ruby Ridge and Bundy Ranch. How many of you remember Ruby Ridge? Y'all remember Bundy Ranch? Very similar situations, government out of control. Government exercising power it doesn't have the authority to exercise, in violation of the rights and the properties and the liberties of the people. But they ended very differently. Why? Not because of a lack of guns, but because of a lack of communication. Can you imagine how differently Ruby Ridge would have ended if the entire world could have seen Mrs. Weaver get shot in the back as she was carrying her child into her home? But at Bundy Ranch, everybody had cameras. It was all over the internet. And we got to see federal agents throwing cancer patients to the ground for arguing, unarmed cancer patients. We got to see the federal agents tasing people for simply arguing with them. And that outraged, and I want to tell you, it not only outraged the people of America, it outraged the world. We're fooling ourselves if we don't know that everybody in the world is watching the mayhem in America. Because this is where liberty is birthed. And they don't want it to be where liberty dies. Because if liberty dies here, what is the hope in Haiti? What is the hope in South Africa? What is the hope in Cuba if liberty dies here? The First Amendment was first on purpose because the power to communicate is the power to unite. Thomas Paine said it's not in numbers that we gather our strength, but in unity. And we need to unite under these fundamental, foundational principles. But how in the world are we going to do that if we don't even know what they are? So let me ask you a question. To yourself right now, not out loud. Name all 5 liberties in the First Amendment. There are 5 liberties in the First Amendment. They were put there on purpose. They were first on purpose. We have a Supreme Court justice in Florida who took a poll and asked Floridians that question. Found out that only 2% of the people polled could name all 5. You wonder why we have a government out of control. It's because Americans don't even know what their rights are. And if you do not know what your rights are, guess what? They're already gone. Because if you don't know what your rights are, you are not exercising them every single day. And if you are not exercising them every single day, then they're gone. You don't have them. And what's even worse, the rights you don't exercise are the rights you lose. And it's the rights that our children will have to pay with their lives to buy back. Is that the future that we want for America? As I sit here and I look out at the future of America, every single person here with the power, with the ability, with the resources to make change. I could not give a flying flip if they shut down the elections in November, and they never happened, because they won't change a thing until we change this. We have to be willing. We have to be willing to choose liberty first. And how will we do that if we do not even know what liberty is? It's important. It's essential that we become educated on these principles so they can drive the policies of all government. Samuel Adams said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties, nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved." He said, but on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. America is sinking. America is sinking because we have become universally ignorant of our rights. We argue about whether or not we should have the states violating our rights. We say, does the Bill of Rights apply to our states? Really? Is that the argument we need to spend time talking about? Do we actually believe that it's reasonable and that our framers intended for the states to have the authority to rule and reign over our mouths, our minds, and our guns? I'll remind you, Thomas Jefferson said that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. The only purpose we ever create government is to secure our rights. So why would our framers ever be sitting back and saying, no, it's okay. It's okay for your state to be tyrannical, just make sure the feds are on their spot. Does that make any sense at all? It makes no sense. Because I'll remind you, the next thing Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence was, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish. Can I remind you that on July 4th, 1776, there was no federal government to be speaking about? The only governments that existed on July 4th were the states. I'm trying to impress upon us that the real solution here to be free people is resting in the power of the people to control and limit their states, so then that their states will control and limit the federal government. The federal government is never going to limit itself. That was not the plan. That was not even an expectation. Our federal government is so far out of control. I believe Thomas Jefferson would say it's become as venal and oppressive as the government from which they separated. Somebody said the other day, our framers wouldn't even recognize our government today. Oh yeah, they would. Because it looks just like Great Britain of 1776. Go read the Declaration of Independence and don't skip over the list of grievances. Read all those grievances and you will see just how close we are to being as venal and oppressive as the government from which they separated. And then you ask again, what do we do? Do you know in November there are 465 seats in Congress up for election? Do you know in November there are over 30,000 seats on the state and local level up for election? How is it with those kind of numbers and that kind of power that we are still insanely focused on one office and two people? An office, by the way, when operating constitutionally, has less power than Congress. The president is not the leader of America, nor was he ever supposed to be. At best, the president is the leader of the military, but only when there is a formal declaration of war. Can anybody tell me the last time we had a formal declaration of war?
World War II.
World War II. Every military action that we have had since World War II has been completely and totally unconstitutional. The President of the United States does not have the authority to raise up the military. The President of the United States does not have the authority to call out war. All of those things are reserved to the legislative branch on purpose. Madison said, we reserved those things to the legislative branch because we knew throughout history that executives are prone to war, and we wanted the legislators to be the representatives of the people to be in control of something like that. The president cannot appoint Supreme Court justices or cabinet members. He can only nominate. And they are only confirmed when 2/3 of the Senate complies. If you don't like Alina Kagan, if you don't like Sotomayor, if you don't like Ginsburg, don't point your finger at the President of the United States. Point your finger at the Senate. They're the ones that put them there. The power of the purse. The most powerful, most important power in government was reserved to the House alone. Article 1, Section 7, Clause 1, dealing with all revenue bills, says they must start with the House. It says the Senate may offer amendments, but may is permissory. So all these little dog and pony shows we see about the Senate shutting down the budget and refusing, it's all gamesmanship, because constitutionally speaking, only the House alone can propose and only the House alone can refuse. That is not my interpretation. That is not my opinion. Those are the exact words of the father of the Constitution, James Madison. So if you disagree with me, it's not me you're disagreeing with, it's the constitutional framers that you're disagreeing with. The president has absolutely no signatory power over a budget whatsoever, and he has no authority to shut down the government. That is all a political ruse to keep the people in fear, to stir drama, to ignite division, and to keep us distracted from the real solutions. Because you see, we have congressmen that are so happy to point fingers at the president, so excited to lay blame on the executive branch. When it comes right down to it, the majority in the House could defund anything that the president's doing tomorrow if they really, really wanted to. So you bring this to your congressman, and what does he say? Oh, well, you just don't know how it really works. That's just the Constitution, right? You're just a purist, KrisAnne. The Constitution is perfection. We can't reach that today. You're not dealing with reality. Why aren't we dealing with reality? Because Americans have accepted this false authority for so long that the politicians actually think they are kings. And that will not change until this changes. Until we start driving our politics and our policies by principles instead of phantoms. The most important words in the entire Constitution and Bill of Rights. The single most important section in the entire Constitution is not the Second Amendment. The single most important section in the Constitution says the enumeration in this Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. If you did a man on the pole, a man on the street pole, and said to them, the rights enumerated in this Constitution shall not be construed or to deny or disparage others retained by the people, how many Americans could tell you where that is? It's the most important language, and it's the 9th Amendment. The second most important language within the Constitution is the 10th Amendment. Within the 9th Amendment, we understand where all the power rests. All the rights in the universe belong to the people. That's what the 9th Amendment says. Whether they're written down or not, they are ours. Power emanates from rights. And the 10th Amendment explains that the powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. You want to know how to fix the federal government? The people must get educated. We must start making it a priority. If we have time to do something else, then we're not spending enough time on liberty. I'm not telling you to quit your jobs. I'm not telling you to stop spending time with your families or stop eating or stop doing whatever. I'm saying we must set aside a part of our day, every single day, to become familiar once again with our rights. We wouldn't have to do this if we'd been teaching this along and along. But we've put ourselves in the position where we've put government in charge of teaching our generations for so long, and they've completely and totally dumbed us down to understand only that government knows best, government is our provider and our protector, and good citizens just obey. No, I'm sorry. This might be a little hard to hear. Good citizens don't obey. Good citizens disobey when the laws violate a higher law.
Amen.
But how do we know? How do we know if we don't know the standard? These are the things that we need to do today, each and every one of us. We need to study and know our rights. We need to know that they are rights and not privileges. See, when you have to ask permission or pay a fee to government to exercise a right, it is no longer a right. It is now a permission. It is a privilege conveyed upon you by government. Do you have to pay a fee to have a rally in the town square? Do you have to pay a fee to carry your firearms? Do you have to pay a fee to file your court documents? Your right to due process is a right, not a privilege. Why do you have to pay for it? The moment you have to pay government to exercise a right is the moment that it's gone. Because what is to stop government from making the fee so high you can't pay it? Can I remind you of the Russian communist takeover? The Russians did not come after the people's guns first. They came after the people's guns last, when they were already so morally destitute and so fundamentally oppressed they could not resist. The first thing they took was their land. And then the next thing they did, they imposed a tax on paper and ink so high that you could not purchase paper and ink without a subsidy from the government. And in order for the newspapers to publish the news, they had to have a subsidy from the government. And once the government issued a subsidy, the government then controlled the words. You wonder why the media is under control now, right? Because they believe their privilege to speak comes from government. We have politicians in Washington, D.C. that believe that the First Amendment should only apply to people with bona fide credentials. That was a speech by Dianne Feinstein on the House floor. I had a Republican politician, a Republican congressman from Michigan tell me the other day, "You don't know how it really works, KrisAnne. You don't work in reality." And I just want to tell you something. We know in the House of Representatives that if we want to vote to fund something, we can fund it. It doesn't matter what the Constitution says. We can fund anything we want with 218 votes, and the Constitution does not limit us. Why would they think that? Because we've let them think that. We've got to get educated as to what our rights are. And then we have to be willing to stand on principles, even when it conflicts with political parties and politicians. Period. Let me ask you something. How many of you believe there are people in government that are destroying our rights because they simply don't know any better? How many of you believe there are people in government destroying our rights because they're wicked and they want to? So let me ask you this question. At the end of the day, what difference does it make? Because the result is exactly the same. Whether it's ignorance or maliciousness, your rights are gone. And this idea that we are constrained by voting the lesser of two evils is only keeping the status quo intact. We got to break free from the mental slavery and start electing people based on principles, morality, and not politics. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get educated on our rights. The second thing we're going to do is start living them. We don't compromise principles. Go look that up in the dictionary. By the very nature of the definition of principle, it cannot be compromised. Because the moment you compromise a principle, it is no longer a principle, it's just a guideline. And I don't think you'll ever be able to find any of our founding fathers say that our Constitution was just a set of guidelines. We've got to live liberty first. Liberty over security. Because Patrick Henry did not say, "Give me national security or give me death." Principle over party. Because we have to realize that political parties are not government, they are private corporate clubs. And we have allowed private corporate clubs to write law and dictate government to us for way too long. We've got to say principle over party and truth over your favorite personality. Do you know how many times I get criticized for pointing out that some constitutional champion is not really so much a champion? How dare you, KrisAnne? You can't attack that person. He has an 85% constitutional rating. Really? Woohoo! 85%. Is that what we call a champion now? I wonder if that's how the Olympics works now. If you come in 15th place, because that's what 85% is, right? 15 down from the top. If you come in 15th place, we're going to give you a gold medal and call you a champion now. But we do that with politicians. Does that work for you? Because think about that. If they are voting in favor of the Constitution 85% of the time, that means they are voting against the Constitution 15% of the time. They are breaking the supreme law of the land 15% of the time. Are we okay with that?
Nope.
We keep electing them. We keep defending them. We must be okay with that. Would that work for you? You're driving down the road. You get pulled over by a police officer. The officer says to you, you've broken such and such a law. And you look at the officer and say, but officer, I follow the law 85% of the time. You gotta give me a pass. How's that gonna work out for you? You wonder why the FBI director, Comey, declared Hillary Clinton above the law? Because every single one of them in Washington, D.C. has already established themselves as above the law, above the supreme law of the land. So what are our little laws? And who are we? But just people that fund their campaigns, points that get them reelected. Why? Because we've forgotten that we are a government instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. What do we need to do? We need to get educated on our rights. We need to stand for liberty first principles. And then we must have the courage and the conviction to not comply if they do not match. Period. Article 6, Section 2 of the Constitution says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof shall be the supreme law of the land. Every law that Congress makes is not the law of the land. Just because they voted into law does not make it law. It must be in compliance with the Constitution first. If it is not in compliance with the Constitution, even Alexander Hamilton said in Federal 78, it is no law at all. If we don't know the standards, if we don't know the principles, how are we going to have the courage and the perseverance to stand up in the face of the government and say, that is no law at all, and I will not comply? You see, these are the things that we must do. Because we are not a reflection of our government. The government is a reflection of its people. And the people keep reflecting the wrong things. We need to stand up and say, we will not comply with national health care because it is not consistent with the Constitution, and therefore it is no law at all. We will not comply with the EPA because the EPA is not consistent with the Constitution, and therefore it is no law at all. We will not comply with the ATF. We will not comply with the Bureau of Land Management. We will not comply with the Department of Energy. We will not comply with the Department of Education. We will not comply with the Department of Interior. We will not comply with HHS. We will not comply with any of it because they are all inconsistent with the Constitution and they are no law at all.
Amen.
And that's the only way things are going to change. As long as we keep funding and supporting the status quo, things will only get worse. We've got to take back the power and the control on the state and local levels where we have the power and control. I don't believe that we have any right to have any kind of fervor any kind of passion for a presidential election if you have not already felt that kind of passion over your sheriff or your governor, because your sheriff is 10 times more powerful than the President of the United States in your jurisdiction, and your governor can look at the President of the United States and tell him to get his butt back in the White House. He's got no business in Illinois. Woo! But if we can't clean up our own house, how do we have any kind of consideration of trying to clean up the White House? So here's the problem. Or rather, here are the conclusions. We must first become educated so that we know what our rights are and we can exercise them on a daily basis. Knowing doesn't do anything unless you're exercising. Before you leave here today, I hope you know all 5 liberties in the First Amendment, and then you have made a plan to exercise every single one of them every single day. We must know the principles of liberty, and we must uphold them above everything else. And then we must be willing to refuse to comply when their principles of the Constitution conflict with the government's policies. And if we do not, here's what we say. Because we've heard this a lot today, haven't we? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. If we are not willing to do these 3 things, then what we're saying is we do not believe that our rights come from our Creator. We do not believe in a Creator, and we believe that government is greater than God. If we are not willing to do these 3 things, then what we are admitting today is that we are comfortable being subjects in a federal kingdom, that we do not live in independent sovereign states, but occupy colonies, and we're okay with the fact that our children will be enslaved. And if we do not do these 3 things, then I hope that the words of Thomas Paine ring in our ears like the raven evermore. Thomas Paine said, in Common Sense, was it Common Sense? It's an American Crisis. He tells this story. He said, I was standing outside of an inn, and this Tory, the Tories are the big government guys, came out, and he said he had his arm around a young boy, as pretty a lad as I ever did see. And he was bragging about the government of the day, boasting of the things that they had done, and laughing about, he said, at least there'll be peace in my day. Thomas Paine said, that is a wicked, selfish parent. He said, only a generous parent will say, if there be trouble, let it be in my day, so my child may have peace. Americans must understand that we have to be sick and tired of the immorality in government. We have to be sick and tired of the slavery of debt and the slavery of servitude being posed upon our children. And we must be uncomfortable in that more than we love the comfort of servitude. We must understand that if we fail to do these 3 things, that we will be classified throughout history as people who were pacified in prosperity, lazy in luxury, complacent and compliant in their comfort, and so selfish and self-centered that they were willing to pass on their debts to their children just so they could be comfortable. Alexander Hamilton said, your children's children will curse you. If we are not willing to do these 3 things, that is the consequence. But we have the power to do all of that tomorrow, today, this afternoon. We can start today. We can say, hey, you know what? I messed up. I'm guilty. I was complacent and compliant. I was ignorant. But no more. I will from this day forward be the right citizen that my children will look back upon with gratitude and love for the gift of liberty that we've passed on. Just 3 things. You and you and you and you and everybody. Just 3 things that we can do as individuals that will make and change the world. And the bottom line is this. We must just simply say, I am not a subject. I am not live in a kingdom. I am a free man. I live in a constitutional republic. And the government is my servant, and I am its master. And then the revolution of the mind will begin. What do you say? Amen. We can do it. We can do it. Amen. Hallelujah. Thank you, everybody. God bless.